one of the most painful things for me of making all these videos and putting them up on YouTube and then watching 50, 60, 100 views is realizing I ain't gonna get the buzz. In fact, my young son thinks it's quite funny. He looks at the video and he thinks, okay, I think you need to lift your thumbnails, you need to have some action. Absolutely no one other than people who you are forcing to watch is going to watch your videos, is going to watch them. Okay. And he's spot on. Yeah. Conscript army, guys, but thank you for persevering. I'm not really in the buzz business, okay, but we will speak a little bit about buzz and how this is, of course, something that with viral marketing, so many firms, brand managers and whatnot seeking to try and do, to build buzz around what they're doing as a company. So without further ado, I can't speak any language at the moment, I'm sorry. I could retake it, but no, let's just zoom through it, okay? In an era of buzz, who's got time to muck around? Taking and retaking, okay. So, buzz, no, we won't put buzz there. No, we won't put it there. Let's put it there, okay. So let's define buzz. Okay. Speculative or excited talk or attention relating especially to a new or forthcoming thing. Oh, that got obscured. Or event. Well, that's no wonder I don't get buzz, right? Dear me, how many academics would ever manage to do that? Right. Oh, well. The painful truth. Okay, well, buzz as an issue, quite separate from social media and whatnot, it's actually been around for quite a while. For about 2 decades, at least academics have actually been trying to get a sense of the social networks involved, effectively the communicative dynamics that are associated with things like cultural, industrial and scientific clusters, to try and understand how people come together, communicate, cross-fertilize ideas-wise. So these days actually using quite digital, sophisticated digital network mapping and whatnot. So the micro level dynamics of group communications have gotten a lot of attention, okay? And one of the reasons for this is to try and make sense, and this is very relevant in the COVID context, of an interesting phenomena. As we've had increased digital enablement, which allows us to communicate over great distances, to do things virtually, as we're doing now, and we have students in the class in fall, no, we're still spring, I'm getting ahead of myself, in spring 2021. We have students in France, in India, in the United States, in Taiwan, in Singapore, for example, all engaging with the content, and it just seems so seamless, you know, whether you're in Saitama or whether you're in Singapore, it doesn't seem to really make a difference. But what we know is putting students in terms of into group projects is 2/3 plus, nearly in fact 3/4 of students expressed a strong preference for face-to-face plus. So clearly there is some sense of coming together face-to-face, interacting. And so academics have been trying to explain this, not just in the context of COVID, but have been trying to understand why in this digitally enabled, globally connected economy, that key clusters seem to have become more important rather than less important. Now, whether it's just simply the price of real estate, we see that certain key cities, London, obviously San Francisco, Silicon Valley, New York, and a number of others, have become ever more desirable, intensely contested in the sense of the price you can pay to be there, in terms of real estate, commercial real estate and individual real estate. And in the end, the preparedness of people to pay, not just simply down to lifestyle. There's so many other beautiful places you can live, but it's actually where you can have a career, and a high-paying and a very rewarding career in one of these key clusters. So it helps that the cities are actually desirable places to live, But the critical thing is people coming together at scale. Okay, so there is a logic to the face-to-face. Now the question is just simply whether the technical enablement, now that we've got Zoom and whatnot, whether that will be sufficient. Doing face-to-face, but a virtual face-to-face, maybe that is enough. Okay. One of the arguments is if you come together face-to-face, you create empathy, then you can go and interact remotely. Very much mirrors the way academia has been. Academics, research active academics, go to conferences every year. They get to know each other personally. They have conference dinners. They drink a bit, eat some food, feel some connections with each other, reaffirm those connections, chatting over extraordinarily bad coffee and sometimes better biscuits in the breaks between conference sessions. And then they go to wherever they come from all over the world and are able to virtually collaborate, sometimes never again meeting up face to face between starting a book project, for example, when it finally appears. But that you've come to some sense through the face-to-face interaction that actually I can trust this person. And so what do we know in terms of face-to-face communications? Okay, well, as a communications technology, high frequency, rapid feedback, lots of visual clues. You just discern from people's body language, if you get the dreaded eye roll, for example, that people are not really engaging with what you're saying. They're doubting what you're saying. By the way, a few hints on this. I have noticed when we've come back face to face that some students have fallen into extraordinarily bad habits with a year of doing remote learning or a year's plus. That, when you're at home, you didn't really have to pay much attention and you could be on your device or your multiple devices or multitasking. But when you are face to face and you're talking with someone and at the same time you're on your device or you're doing something completely different, it's pretty rude and you're going to be hated. So don't do that, okay? Be there for people. In fact, make the big display of picking up the phone and putting it face down, turning it off, putting it face down, leaning in and saying, I'm here for you, okay? Bosses who do that make generally a very good impression on employees who want to have a conversation. There is nothing worse than talking with someone who is constantly looking at their watch, glancing at the clock on the wall. This whole sense that you're counting, they are counting the time, counting down for whatever you're going to tell them to be over. Okay, so the interacting face-to-face is important. Also, a really striking thing we know, so much research have told us, is that we do engage in a lot of mirroring behaviors. The way people's body language evolves normally is to some degree reflecting how the other person is. And when we're making a real connection with people, our habits, our speech, our accents, whatnot, tend to converge to some degree. Put me with other Australians and I tend to become much more Australian in the way I can react. I can go very Aussie if I want to, or I can be more of what I normally am in Tokyo, which is more neutral because I have to be, because people don't know what the bloody hell I'm on about if I fall into my old Orca Aussie tendencies, which is quite nice when I'm connecting with Australians anyway. So we have that dimension, I think we understand. But also very significantly, and this has been borne through lots of research, controlled experiments and whatnot, we're much better at detecting people's lies. And we're much less likely to lie ourselves, partly because we know we're better at detecting the lies of people when they're lying shamelessly to our face, okay? We're much more likely to catch them out, okay? Also, just the mere presence of being there, I'm here for you, literally, okay, is actually signaling commitment. Taking the time to stop, to pay attention to people in this attention scarcity age is a very significant thing, okay? Anonymity can be very positive in environments of persecution because of your beliefs. Okay? So anonymity in certain times in the past has allowed people greater creative freedom, freedom of religious expression, intellectual expression. But it also allows appalling abuse, appalling irresponsibility as well. So coming face to face, there is this loss of anonymity. It creates positive incentives for cooperation and performance because literally you're being seen and you're being judged, okay? And you can judge. And to a significant degree, you will acquire shared values just simply by being in the company of each other and interacting, okay? So these dynamics are important dynamics, and it's why some companies and some of the ones who pay the most and expect the most in terms of employee commitment, the likes of Goldman Sachs and whatnot, really resisting permanent work from home and trying to bring people back into the workplace. A lot of companies, I think, will end up in a hybrid model because they recognize the degree of benefit and creativity enhancing communications and can come around through some face-to-face interactions, forming empathetic connections with people where you feel safe to be completely creative and express your own view and actually feel a regard for the other person. But at the same time, people don't want to be stuck with each other all the time and terrible commutes. And very often what happens is that people are in a common workplace, but they're just simply connecting digitally anyway. And one of the interesting phenomena that is increasingly showing up through research is that in a strange kind of way, so that people can get work done, they very often retreat into themselves in a communal workspace and actually form fewer connections rather than more. So combination of being able to work alone, whether it's in breakout spaces in an office, for example, and then more meaningful coming together moments where people genuinely value the connectivity seems to be the best way to enhance productivity. I know myself, I'm collaborating with several friends, researchers in distant places. A very good friend, Jakob Thestrup, years ago was a student, came to SILS, and then he went and did a master's degree in Copenhagen again, and joint master's degree in Bocconi in Italy, and a PhD at Tordai and whatnot, and we're polishing a bunch of things together, know each other well, and for the last year and a half we've been collaborating completely remotely. He was in Berlin, and then he's in his summer house with his gorgeous young son in Denmark, and that's just completely seamless. We chat normally late at night because of the time difference, and collaborate in effective ways, but because there is that mutual trust there. So I feel absolutely no handicap on being within the other side of the earth. One of the interesting things with face-to-face conversations, whether it is virtual or physically kind of face-to-face, is that rush, that excitement, the energizing nature of a really good conversation. I have this all the time with Jakob. You know, the ideas flow and the comment goes in various directions. It's as David Kelly, head of IDEO, calls the bird walks. You know, you go off in lots of different directions. And it's unplanned, it's unpredictable, it's really engaging, good ideas to have expansive properties, and you suddenly realize you've been talking for hours, and yeah, that's what it is. Scheduling that normally doesn't work. The very nature of actually trying to, draw a little box around this at a time with a defined set of outcomes kind of kills the purpose. You might as well just interact on a common text through email, for example. The sobering thing, though, with dealing with email and SMS communications is research has shown is that people are more frequently lying. Also, recent research just released last week and published in the Times Higher Education Supplement shows that students are 50% more likely to try and cheat in online exams than face-to-face, and even more so still when taken remotely, because maybe people feel disconnected from the process. Okay. When there is socially observed communications, when a lot of people are watching, and this is the great thing about LinkedIn, people can't fake it so much because all your former colleagues can see it, okay? So people are likely to lie less actually on LinkedIn about their professional achievements and experiences than they are in a direct CV, the actual submitted to a company. At the same time, there is more self-conscious tactical self-representation on social media, self-curating or spinning yourself. To some degree, fake it till you make it, but you can't completely fake it because you can be sort of outed if other people know you. Now, in terms of the social dynamics and buzz and mutual obligation, leads to this, and you may be thinking, what is this? Why have I got Tupperware here? Well, Tupperware is this wonderful example of a business that for decades its selling model was based on tapping into people's social networks. The phenomenon of the Tupperware party, that you had brand ambassadors, effectively mostly housewives, Sengyoshufu, who would hold Tupperware parties and invite a whole bunch of people who felt socially obligated to come along, and they came along and they had to eat food, and they had the social interaction. They all felt obligated to buy some Tupperware. Okay, so literally this was the model, to tap into people's social networks to sell things. By the way, I find it extraordinarily annoying when people try and take advantage of old friendships and connections to sell stuff. Please never, if you're working for a company and you end up in egg yolk, never come by my office with an egg yolk pitch, okay? And particularly asking me to introduce you to people to sell things in Waseda. There is nothing more annoying to professors than people who do this. No, the one thing that's more annoying is the guy who you haven't heard from 25 years, you went to university with, and he suddenly calls you up and says, hey, how you going? Hey, you want to buy some life insurance? No, that is a really desperate salesperson whose career is falling apart when they dip into their high school album, for example, to try and upsell. So designing buzz, this has been around for a long time. Classic example, right at the cusp of the shift from bought media to more earned attention is one I mention here, the BMW Films initiative. BMW decided to do something quite interesting. This is a time when people were connected by email, but not yet by social media, but were widely looking at things on websites, but not very much on YouTube then. So they decided to take some of the budget that they had assigned to normal paid media and instead to give it to prominent young filmmakers and asked them to make a short movie featuring BMW cars, and they gave them some cars and allowed them to, bash them up if necessary. And one of the really interesting ones, one that got a lot of attention, was a young actor who was to become an absolute A-lister, Clive Owen, and A-list director as well, Ang Lee, the Taiwanese director, and he made a very short movie called The Hire. Very nicely done, and you can see a link to it on the Designing Corporate Communications website. And that was interesting because it went so viral, despite the fact that people in those days to share had to actually copy paste the URL into an email and put in people's email address and share it and say, check this out. But nonetheless, it was hugely effective based on the view rates that they could detect from people accessing it. Okay. So, of course, all these things we understand. I really don't need to linger on this. You simply get it, internet search changed marketing, thinking, and tactics. The good thing about search was that you already know that people have got a pretty high level, not necessarily intention to buy, but they're fairly motivated. Okay. Buzz goes beyond that. Buzz really is trying to get people to share content to promote engagement with brands well before the search function might happen. So people may not have even thought about being a consumer in a particular product space, for example, but maybe some engaging content kind of lures them to there, and it opens up an account in their mind. I've heard it described by one of the top former heads of corporate communications for Nissan, who now is top brand manager for Aston Martin. In fact, he went back there. He was doing that even before he went to Nissan, a guy called Simon Spruill. So this idea that you're opening an account in a customer's mind, and then hopefully making some deposits in it subsequently, once they've been prepared to engage with your brand. So in terms of earning attention, event design is a critical way of doing this. But you can do a whole bunch of things, anything that draws attention. I've got this one here. It's from a number of years ago. Audi did this. It's quite a thing in Western countries, April Fool's Day jokes. I feature this particular one here simply because a former SIL student, and it was a zemisay of mine who took this class actually, she was actually involved in directly doing this. And it was just a fun thing, and they kind of announced that they were introducing a Japanese style Audi, and through social media got some attention. But then the interesting thing was that they said that, within a certain period of time after April the 1st, that if you went to an Audi dealership, you could get this very nice, I think it was Hinoki, Japanese rice spatula with the Audi logo. So there's a bit of an incentive for people to ashi o hakobu ne, kind of carry themselves into the Audi dealership and get yourself a rice spatula. Okay, so create a little bit of kind of scarcity, fear of missing out as well, a little bit of buzz. Okay, so what we see in a range of fields is very activity-based fields. Sports, surfing, snowboarding, for example. So many others, where there's plenty of scope to create engaging content. We see there that the buzz works particularly well. Rather than spending money on just placed ads, placements, even in digital media, to actually invest in content creation, particularly featuring brand ambassadors. Say in a snowboarding case, you've got really prominent riders, and you bring in some really good videographers to capture them in action. This particular genre of content is hugely desirable for fans, particularly in very seasonal sports. So people kind of amuse themselves in the out of season months by watching a whole range of content, so much of it featuring sponsored riders and brands, and keeping the brand story alive. And often companies will jump into events that give them attention as well. So Nissan and the X-Trail has been using it to sponsor various events. Now, one thing in terms of buzz, we will see that sometimes this has been used in a more radical protest kind of way, sometimes anti-capitalist kind of way. At one point, people were talking about this notion of culture jamming, an organized social activist effort that aims to counter the bombardment of consumption-oriented messages in the mass media, for example. Okay, and sometimes with vandalizing billboards and whatnot, hacktivism, and we see this in a whole range of contexts. And sometimes this involved a flash mob thing, and I'll say something about this in a moment. Occupation events, kind of guerrilla events, a whole range of ways to take advantage of a corporate event in a critical fashion. And then sometimes corporates themselves actually copy this, and that can get particularly contentious. For example, if one brand has paid to sponsor an event, and then another brand, for example, flies an air balloon over the stadium where one beer brand has sponsored it, and you're deliberately inserting your brand in someone else's sponsored event. And of course, the people who paid for the sponsorship absolutely hate that. One of the most striking things in terms of going viral, one of the most absolutely confronting and terrifying, but very effective, was the now largely wiped out, but Islamic State. Islamic State was the first time we've seen a very active terrorist organization using social media and its powerful visuality to create really confronting images, which mobilized its own potential recruits and terrified others who are considered were its enemies. And I'm not going to go into the details of this image, but you might imagine where I was going to go. But we also see the reverse of this, that strikingly during the Syrian civil war, that a rival group, I think it was, don't hold me to it, but I think it was the Al-Nusra Front, they flipped this by carrying out a very brutal videoed execution of Al-Qaeda people, with reversing the color scheme and whatnot, so people knew what it was. It was actually, they were riffing on it. By the way, you may be wondering about the orange tracksuit thing, but that was a very deliberate visual reference to during the war on terror, American held prisoners at Guantanamo Bay being dressed in orange tracksuits. So very deep symbolism involved in using this. So finally, I just want to discuss conjuring crowds. In the context of COVID, that's the last thing we want to do, okay? It's 2020, 2021 is all about dispersing crowds, okay? But a lot of social media, and particularly this notion of getting buzz, if you to summon a crowd or create, it gets a tangible sense that there is a buzz. And very often organizing events involve directly manipulating this. One of the old tricks, for example, is you have a certain number of RSVPs to an event, a number of people saying they're coming, so you deliberately put out 30% fewer seats than the number of people who've actually registered for the event, to create a sense of scarcity that people have to pack in. If you have a guest speaker, and people are standing at the back and around the sides and listening, you feel privileged to be there, that you're in, you're subject to, you're a party to something that's very, very meaningful, because there is this sense of it being oversubscribed, or being part of a crowd, okay? So conjuring up a crowd physically gave a very strong sense of buzz, okay? Terrible in a pandemic. Okay, so effectively social media effectively was used to do this, connecting people, often used for illegal purposes, flash mobs for political protests, for example, raves, illegal raves held in abandoned spaces where you would get, it's quite a big thing actually in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, for example. You'd get event organizers who would break into a off-limits old space for security reasons. It was kind of off limits, an old warehouse or whatever, okay, and they would hold a rave, and then the police would track social media, and then they'd turn up and they'd kind of bust them, and everyone would flee, okay? So we see a whole bunch of these things, okay? So flash mobs, the first time we see an explicit experiment on this was actually was a guy who was at Harper's Magazine, later on moved to Wired Magazine, and Bill Vasic, and he engaged in some social experiments, first of all with flash mobs. Some of them kind of got out of control, and some of them have been done very nicely. There's one on a website there where you see Beethoven's Ninth being performed in a nice Spanish case. Air France staff did an interesting flash mob video production a few years back, for example. But of course, in COVID-19 context, it's absolutely a no-go. And it's also become just a bit of a cliche. Like so many of these things, it's great for a time, but it's like, seriously, you're going to do this? And people would have said, you're going to do this in 2019? Isn't that a bit kind of cliched? Well, of course, 2020, 2021, absolutely no go, okay? Now, finally, when we speak about the crowd, is this question of, the mocking crowd. I mean, this is where I'm throwing in a broader issue, and that is parodic takes on corporate communications. You create a commercial, a television commercial, and then it's widely known, and then along comes a very clever kind of parody of it, and the parody becomes so popular that the whole genre or the look of the commercial can no longer be continued. There's a very famous case, which I've got on the website there. First of all, the original commercials, and then the parody by Fry and Laurie, for example. Pretension by Fry and Laurie, which was really, excuse the expression, completely taking the piss out of those very arty black and white Calvin Klein commercials that were done by David Lynch, and in particular in the late 80s and the early 1990s. And that parody became so well known because it was actually part of the of a very popular British comedy TV show, and it was actually kind of used as part of the opening of the show. So no one could then make a television commercial in that particular, noir stylized kind of way. So one of the design parameters for any messaging has to be, is it kind of parody or I almost said something ruder, muck-upable proof. And to give a simple example, when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Queensland, a guy who actually won the election despite it, but despite the best efforts of his rivals and some of them I know, he had posters all over the campus which described himself as effective and efficient. And of course, the rival candidate and supporters, in a few fun hours, I think after a few drinks and some very big marker pens, had turned his posters all over the campaign to say that he was defective and deficient. Okay, just running around with the addition of D's on them on his slogans. So make sure you properly stress test any kind of copywriting you might do, any kind of imaging you might use. Just how vulnerable is it to people taking the piss out of it at your expense? Okay. And by the way, I really do look forward to someone thoroughly mocking me in a kind of Hitler parody video way or something with all of these online teaching. I'm surprised you guys have been incredibly generous to us. I'm sure there is some really great shareable content to be made on really, really bad Zoom classes, for example, with all of your capability to do instant screen recording and whatnot. I really would be expecting a little bit more creative kind of content from you guys. I actually put on my website, pokachan.com, that I will actually give a reward for the most kind of creative, and I don't mind if it's cruel, kind of parody of myself. If you want to go and have a look at the links there, if you look at Roy and HD, two Australian comedians who created a whole kind of a very distinctive thing they've done for many, many years. I'm not sure if they're going to do it this year with the Olympics as well too. But they provided a commentary of the Olympics where you would watch the Olympics or another sport event on TV, and you would turn down the official sound, and then they would call a completely different narrative over the top of it. Woody Allen's very first film was this, where he actually took a very cheap Japanese film and laid a completely different script over the top. And the Hitler parody videos take famously the scene where Hitler declares in his bunker that the war is lost and has a breakdown, a tantrum, we should say, in German, and then people subtitle it in English. If you're a German speaker, it's ridiculous. It's just, it's silly. But a myriad array of them. I posted one there that was quite popular because it was relatively well done, on Hitler's surfing holiday ruined, but so many other people, their PS3 or whatever had a technical issue, and you could see there. So we have to start with the assumption that any digital content in particular can be so easily messed with. We all have screen record, screen capture functions built into our devices now, for example. So there's absolutely nothing stopping people sampling. And this video, and I'm very conscious of it, the settings actually quite explicitly allow, sampling. So gonna go to it if you've got nothing else better to do. But I'd like to think maybe there are some further candidates, some other more deserving candidates for even more brutal parodies. But there is a prize if someone wants to take the piss out of me. Cheers.